Putangina! Sino yung mga iyon? Bakit nila ako pinapaputukan? Sigaw ni Zenaida Cortez sa sarili, habang tumatakbo siya palayo sa umaatikabong putukan, yung damit niya, punit-punit na, yung mukha niya, may dugo na galing sa isang hiwa sa noo. Katatapos lang ng isang key political mission niya para sa kanyang ama, si Governor Antonio Cortez, isang makapangyarihan at kontrobersyal na politiko. Pero imbes na tagumpay, kamatayan ang sumalubong sa kanya. Ambush. She knew too much. And someone wanted her silenced. Permanently. Kailangan kong makatakas. Kailangan kong mabuhay. Sa gitna ng kagubatan, sa dilim ng gabi, naisip niya ang tanging paraan. Kinuha niya ang kanyang wallet, dinukot ang lahat ng A niya, driver's license, company fee, pati yung university alumni card niya. With trembling hands, she threw them into a nearby ravine, along with her bloodied blazer. Para sa mga hahabol sa kanya, para sa buong mundo, si Zenaida Cortez, ang unika hija ni Governor Cortez, ay patay na. Inilibing na niya ang kanyang pagkatao. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs gave out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, narating niya ang isang liblib na kalsada sa probinsya ng San Rafael. Doon, sa tabi ng daan, malapit sa isang tila abandonadong klinika, bumagsak siya, walang malay. Pair of headlights cut through the darkness. Isang pick-up truck ang huminto. Bumaba ang isang lalaki, matangkad, may matipunong pangangatawan at mga matang kasing lamig ng gabi. He knelt beside her, checking her pulse. "You don't get to die here, stranger," the man muttered, his voice low and gravelly, before effortlessly scooping her up into his arms. Zenaida woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the soft beeping of a heart monitor. Nasa isang simpleng kwarto siya, nakahiga sa isang kama. May benda ang ulo niya at yung mga galos niya, nalinis na. Nakita niya yung lalaking bumuhat sa kanya, nakatayo sa may bintana, nakatalikod. "Inasaan ako?" she managed to croak out, her throat dry. The man turned. His face was ruggedly handsome, but his expression was stoic, unreadable. "Nasa klinika ka." "Sa San Rafael." "I'm T. Garner. Ako ang doktor dito." "Doktor? Sa ganito kaliblib na lugar?" "Salamat sa pagligtas mo sa akin," Zenaida said, trying to sit up. "Sino ka?" Neely asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "Anong pangalan mo? Saan ka galing?" Panic seized Zenaida. She couldn't tell him the truth. Zenaida Cortez was dead. Ang pangalan ko." "Z," she lied, the name suddenly popping into her head. "Z. At wala akong pamilya. Wala akong maalala kung paano ako napunta dito." Amnesia. The oldest trick in the book, but hopefully, it would work. Steve stared at her, his eyes narrowed, as if trying to read her mind. "Z," he repeated slowly. "Wala kang pamilya. At wala kang maalala." He didn't sound convinced. Just then, the door creaked open, and a little girl, around 6 or 7 years old, peeked in. She had teeth intense eyes and a rebellious pout. "Papa, sino siya?" the little girl asked, her voice surprisingly loud for her small frame. "April, anak, this is Z," Tita said, his voice softening slightly when he addressed his daughter. "She's a guest. For now." April glared at Zenaida, her eyes filled with an instant dislike. "Ayoko sa kanya, Papa. Ayoko ng strangers dito sa bahay natin." And with that, she slammed the door shut. Bahay nila? So, this clinic was also their home. Zenaida felt tipang of guilt. She was intruding. Later that day, after T had tended to her wounds again, he was surprisingly gentle. Despite his cold demeanor, Zenaida was resting in the small guest room he had prepared for her. Nakabukas ang maliit na gihi sa sulok, nagbabalita. Mariing kinukondena ni Governor Antonio Cortez ang brutal na pagpatay sa kanyang unika hija na si Zenaida Cortez. Ang labi ng biktima, kasama ang mga personal na gamit nito, ay natagpuan sa isang bangin malapit sa pinangyarihan ng ambush. Umiiyak na nanawagan si Governor Cortez ng hustisya para sa kanyang anak. Zenaida stared at the screen, her blood running cold. Her father crying, believing she was dead. The takot and intriga intensified. Her plan had worked, too well perhaps. But now, she was truly alone, ghost in a strange town, with a new identity and dangerous secret. T walked into the room carrying a tray of food. He saw the news report, then he looked at Zenaida, his eyes narrowed. He had seen her flinch when Governor Cortez's face appeared on screen. He had seen the flicker of recognition of pain in her eyes. He said nothing. He just placed the tray on the bedside table and stared at Z, silent accusation in his gaze. The lie had begun. And Zenaida, no, Z, knew that her life, and the lives of the people in this remote clinic in San Rafael, would never be the same again. The anak ng gobernador had buried her past, but for how long could she keep it hidden? And what would happen when the truth finally came out? Z's first few days at Steve Garner's clinic/home were a delicate dance of cautious observation and unspoken suspicion. T, though he never directly confronted her about the news report, remained distant and watchful. Yung mga titig niya, parang laging may tanong, laging may pagdududa. Z, on her part, tried to be as inconspicuous as possible, sticking to her small guest room, her feigned amnesia her only shield. Pero hindi pwedeng habang buhay siyang magkukulong doon. At alam niyang pabigat na siya. One morning, she approached T while he was having his usual black coffee in the small, utilitarian kitchen. "Das T," she began, her voice a little hesitant. "Salamat ulit sa lahat. Pero kailangan ko na sigurong umalis. Nakakahiya na sa inyo." T took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes assessing her. "At saan ka naman pupunta, Z? Sabi mo, wala kang maalala, wala kang pamilya." His voice was flat, challenging. Z faltered. Hindi ko pa alam. Maghahanap ako ng trabaho." A humorless smile touched Tigat lips. "Trabaho? Sa itsura mong yan? With your soft hands and your amnesia? Good luck with that." He paused, then said, "My daughter, April, needs a nanny. Her previous one left unexpectedly. It's a temporary position. Live in. Food and lodging included. Plus a small allowance." He looked at her pointedly. "Interested?" Z was taken aback. "Eh nanny? Siya. Zenaida Cortez, ang anak ng gobernador, magiging yaya?" The thought was almost laughable. Pero she had no choice. She needed a place to stay, a way to blend in, to hide. And maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity to start over, kahit pansamantala lang. Plus, there was a strange, undeniable pull towards this cold, enigmatic doctor and his equally enigmatic daughter. A flicker of kilig, perhaps. Or just plain curiosity. "Oo po, das T," she said, trying to sound grateful. "Tinatanggap ko po." Ni nodded curtly. "Good. But have house rules, Z." He then proceeded to lay them down, his voice all business. "Rule number 1, April is give priority. Her well-being, her happiness, comes first. Rule number 2, no personal questions. About me, about April, about our past. Rule number 3, do your job, do it well, and stay out of trouble. Break any of these rules, and you're out." Z just nodded, feeling a mixture of intimidation and a strange sort of respect. This man, for all his coldness, clearly loved his daughter fiercely. Her first few days as April's tiyaya were a disaster. April, true to her initial reaction, resented Z's presence. The little girl was sullen, withdrawn, and prone to tantrums. She'd ignore Z, refuse to eat the food Z prepared, and generally make Z's life miserable. "Ayoko sayo," April would often shout. "Hindi kita kailangan. Gusto ko si Mama. Si Mama." Z learned from Lorena, the stern but efficient middle-aged housekeeper who had been with the Garners for years, that April's mother had passed away few years ago. T rarely spoke of her, and the topic was clearly a painful one. Z's heart ached for the motherless child, and for the widowed doctor who seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. One afternoon, while T was out on medical call to a remote barangay, April, in a fit of pique, locked Z out of the house. It was a sweltering hot day, and Z, still recovering from her injuries, started to feel dizzy. She knocked, she pleaded, but April refused to open the door. "Umalis ka na. Ayaw kita dito," the little girl shouted from inside. Z, feeling weak and defeated, slumped against the door, the sun beating down on her mercilessly. After a while, dark clouds gathered, and a sudden, torrential rain began to fall. Z was drenched in seconds, shivering uncontrollably. The stress, the heat, the cold rain, it was too much. She felt her strength ebbing away, and then darkness. When T returned hours later, he found Z collapsed on the doorstep, pale, unconscious, and burning with fever. April, peeking through the window, looked terrified and guilty. Without a word, T gently scooped Z into his arms, just like he did on the night he found her beside the roadside, and carried her inside. He didn't scold April. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and concern, before carrying Z to his own bedroom, the master bedroom, which was larger and more comfortable than the guest room. He worked with a quiet, focused intensity, stripping off Z's wet clothes, his touch surprisingly impersonal, professional, and gently toweling her dry before dressing her in one of his oversized shirts. He took her temperature, administered medication, and then sat by her bedside all night, patiently sponging her forehead with cool cloth, monitoring her breathing, his face a mask of worry. Z drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of T's presence, his gentle touch, his soft, murmured words of comfort. In her fevered dreams, she saw her father's face, then the man who had ambushed her, then Pete's cold eyes, then April's angry pout. It was a confusing, terrifying jumble. When she finally woke up the next morning, her fever had broken. She felt weak, but clear-headed. She was in needed bed. And Z was asleep in a chair beside her, his head resting on his folded arms, his usually stern face softened by exhaustion. A wave of emotion washed over Z. Gratitude. Confusion. And that strange, persistent kilig. This man, this cold, distant doctor, he had nursed her back to health. Twice. Later that day, after Z had managed to eat some lugaw Lorena had prepared, April timidly approached her. The little girl's eyes were red-rimmed, her lower lip trembling. "Yaya ZD." April whispered, looking at the floor. "Sorry po. Sorry po kung nalock ko kayo sa labas. Hindi ko po sinasadya na magkasakit kayo." Z's heart melted. She reached out and gently took April's small hand. "Okay lang, April. Naiintindihan kita." "Talaga po?" April looked up, her eyes wide. "Hindi po kayo galit?" Z shook her head, a soft smile on her face. "Hindi. Medyo na-miss ko lang yung aircon." April giggled, a small, hesitant sound. Then, she did something that surprised Z. She leaned forward and gave Z a quick, Levi hug. Please don't leave us, Yaya Z," April whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Please stay." The tampuhan between them was broken. In its place, a fragile, tentative bond had begun to form. That evening, while Z was tidying up Pivet's room, he had insisted she stay there until she fully recovered. While he slept on the sofa in his study, she stumbled upon a small, unopened wooden box tucked away in the back of his closet. Curiosity getting the better of her, she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were stacks of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. They were addressed to "My dearest C," and the handwriting was delicate, feminine. His late wife's letters. Unread. Z stared at the letters, her heart aching for the man who was so good at healing others, but seemed incapable of healing his own broken heart. This pambihirang yaya, with her own hidden secrets and buried past, had just stumbled upon another layer of mystery in the enigmatic T. Garner. And the kilig she felt was now mixed with profound sense of empathy, and a growing desire to understand the man behind the cold, protective walls. The discovery of his late wife's unread letters haunted Z. Bakit hindi niya binabasa? Was the pain still too raw? O baka naman may iba pang dahilan? The mystery surrounding T. Garner deepened, and Z found herself increasingly drawn to him, a dangerous cocktail of kilig, curiosity, and a growing, undeniable affection brewing in her heart. After Z recovered from her illness, life at the Garner Clinic home settled into new decade. April, true to her word, had completely warmed up to Yaya Z. They would spend hours playing, reading stories, and even baking lopsided cookies in the small kitchen, much to Lorena's initial disapproval, which soon turned into grudging admiration for Z's patience with April. Z, for the first time in a long, long time, felt a sense of belonging. A fragile happiness she was almost afraid to acknowledge. And T was still reserved, still a man of few words, but the coldness in his eyes had softened. He would occasionally share a quiet smile with Z, or engage her in brief, almost normal conversations about April, or even about the weather. Minsan, nahuhuli ni Z na nakatitig ito sa kanya, a strange, unreadable expression on his face, bago ito mabilis na umiwas. The emotional tension between them was palpable, a live wire humming just beneath the surface. One evening, Z was in her small guest room, looking at the only photo she had of her real family, a faded picture of her father, and her mother, taken years ago, before her mother had passed away and before her father had become the powerful, ruthless governor he was now. A wave of anguish and longing washed over her. She missed them. She missed her old life, kahit gaano pa ito kakomplikado. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the photo to her chest, hidden NC card with her real name, Zenaida Cortez, tucked safely behind it. Unknown to her, Key had been passing beside her room and saw her through the slightly ajar door. He saw her tears, the pain in her eyes, the way she clutched that hidden photo. He didn't say anything. He just stood there for a moment, his heart atching with a strange, protective urge. This Z, this woman with no past, was clearly carrying a heavy burden. Later that night, Z couldn't sleep. She wandered out into the small garden behind the clinic, the full moon casting an ethereal glow over everything. The air was cool, fragrant with the scent of sampaguita and dama de noche. She was surprised to find C already there, leaning against an old acacia tree, staring up at the stars. He looked lonely. Hindi ka rin makatulog? Z asked softly, approaching him. Teeth turned, a small, sad smile on his lips. Masyadong maraming iniisip. Ako rin, Z admitted. They stood there in comfortable silence for a while, just watching the stars. Then, T did something unexpected. He started humming a soft, melancholic tune, an old Filipino folk song Z vaguely remembered her mother singing to her as a child. Ang ganda ng kanta, Z whispered. It was the wife's favorite, T said, his voice barely audible. It was the first time he had voluntarily mentioned his late wife to her. Z's heart ached for him. I'm sorry, T. He looked at her then, his eyes, in the moonlight, filled with a raw vulnerability she had never seen before. Don't be, he said. She wouldn't want us to be sad. He paused, then, almost hesitantly, he asked, Z can ask you to dance. Z was stunned. Dance? Here? Under the stars? Walang music, walang ibang tao. Just them. It felt intimate. Dangerous. But she couldn't say no, not to the sadness, the longing in his eyes. Aside, she whispered. He gently took her hand, his touch sending shivers down her spine. He put his other hand on her waist, pulling her slightly closer. They began to sway slowly, a silent, intense dance under the moonlight. Their bodies moved in perfect harmony, as if they had danced together 1,000 times before. Z could feel the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart against hers. She could smell his clean, masculine scent, a scent that was becoming increasingly, dangerously, familiar. The kilig was overwhelming. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he could hear it. She looked up at him, and their eyes met, and in that moment, under the spell of the moon and the stars and the unspoken emotions between them, something snapped. He leaned down, his eyes searching hers, asking a silent question. Z's breath hitched. She knew she should pull away, she knew this was wrong, dangerous, but she couldn't. She wanted this. She wanted him. And then, he kissed her. It wasn't a raw, demanding kiss. It was slow, tender, hesitant at first, then deepening with a raw, pent-up emotion that left Z breathless. It was a kiss of longing, of sadness, of a shared loneliness. A kiss of a secret, a forbidden connection. It was everything. When they finally broke apart, they were both trembling, their breathing ragged. They just stared at each other, gulat, confused, and undeniably, irrevocably, drawn to each other. What happened next was a blur. One kiss led to another, more urgent this time, more desperate. They found themselves in Mivet's room, their clothes discarded on the floor, their bodies moving together in a dance as old as time. It was a night of shared vulnerability, of unspoken needs, of desperate seeking of comfort in each other's arms. Isang gabi. Isang pagkakamali. O baka naman, isang bagay na matagal nang dapat mangyari. The next morning, Z woke up in Mivet's arms, the early morning sun streaming through the window. For a blissful moment, she felt happy. Safe. Loved. Then, reality crashed in. Anong ginawa nila? This was wrong. She was his nanny. He was her employer. He was still mourning his late wife. And she was living a lie. Guilt and awkwardness washed over her. She carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake T, and tiptoed back to her own room, her cheeks burning with shame. But she wasn't careful enough. As she was sneaking out of Tivet's room, her heart pounding, she saw the small figure standing at the end of the hallway, watching her with wide, accusing eyes. It was April. April didn't say anything. She just stared at Z, her lower lip trembling, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion, hurt, and betrayal. Then, she turned and ran into her own room, slamming the door shut. Z's heart sank. April had seen her. And now, everything was even more complicated. The fragile bond she had built with April, the tentative peace she had found in this house, was it all about to shatter? A few days later, Z started feeling off nausea in the mornings. Unusual fatigue. A strange aversion to certain smells. At first, she dismissed it as stress, as a side effect of the emotional turmoil she was going through. Pero habang lumilipas ang mga araw, the symptoms persisted. And a horrifying, unbelievable suspicion started to form in her mind. One afternoon, while TV and April were out, Z, with trembling hands, took a home pregnancy test she had secretly bought from the town pharmacy. She waited, her heart pounding, her breath held. And then, she saw it, 2 faint pink lines. Positive. She was pregnant. Buntis ang yaya. Buntis si Zenaida Cortez, ang anak ng gobernador na inilibing na ang pagkatao. At ang ama ay si E.C.T. Garner, ang biyudong doktor na hindi pa rin alam ang tunay niyang pagkatao. The gulat, the takot, the selos, for future she might never have with T. For life, she was so desperately trying to escape, and the overwhelming kilig from that one night, it all crashed down on Z with the force of a tidal wave. Her secret was about to get a whole lot bigger. And a whole lot more dangerous. The 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test felt like death sentence to Z. Buntis siya. Buntis sa anak ni T.Z. Garner, ang lalaking unti-unti na niyang minamahal, pero ang lalaking hindi naman talaga siya kilala. How could she tell him? How could she explain this, on top of all her other lies? Takot. Yun ang nangingibabaw sa puso niya. She tried to hide it, of course. She wore looser clothes, tried to control her morning sickness, which was getting worse, and avoided tea as much as possible. Pero si Tea, he wasn't stupid. He started noticing. Yung pamumutla ni Z, yung madalas niyang pagkahilo, yung bigla niyang pagtakbo sa banyo. Z, are you okay? He would ask, his brow furrowed with concern, but also with growing suspicion. You've been looking pale lately. Sigurado ka bang okay ka lang? Naman, Dossie, Z would stammer, forcing a smile. Pagod lang siguro. O baka nasobrahan lang sa luto ni Lorena. A lame excuse, she knew, but it was all she could come up with. T would just stare at her, his eyes narrowed, clearly not believing her. The doubt was there, silent accusation hanging between them. Meanwhile, April, after that morning she saw Z sneaking out of T's room, had become distant again. She was polite, but the easy camaraderie they once shared was gone. Parang may invisible wall na namamagitan sa kanila. Z's heart ached. She had not only betrayed T's trust, but also April's. Then, things took a more dangerous turn. One afternoon, while Z was playing with April in the garden, two men in dark suits and sunglasses approached the clinic gate. They looked out of place. Intimidating. Naghahanap kami ng isang babae, one of the men said to Lorena, who had answered the gate. Matangkad, maputi, may peklat malapit sa kilay. Huling nakita sa area na to, mga ilang buwan na ang nakalipas. Z, who was within earshot, froze. That description, it was her. Bago pa siya nagpanggap na Z. May balita kami na baka anak siya ng isang kilalang politiko, the other man added, his voice low and menacing. Governor Cortez. May malaking pabuya para sa sinumang makakapagturo sa kinaroroonan niya. Lorena, ever loyal to T, quickly denied knowing anyone like that. Wala pong ganyang babae dito. Baka nagkakamali lang kayo ng lugar. But her eyes darted nervously towards Z, who was trying to act nonchalant while her heart hammered against her ribs. The men eventually left, but not before leaving a chilling warning, kung may malaman kayo, ipagbigay alam nyo agad sa amin. Mahalaga to. That night, T confronted Z. Who were those men, Z, he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. And Gavis, did they describe someone who looks exactly like you and mention Governor Cortez? Z's mind raced. She had to lie. She had to protect herself, her secret, and now her unborn child. Hindi ko alam, T, she stammered. Wala akong kilalang Governor Cortez. Baka kamukha ko lang yung hinahanap nila. T stared at her, his eyes boring into hers. He didn't believe her. She could see it in the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes narrowed with suspicion, and was that hurt? Kamukha lang, he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Or are you Zenaida Cortez, the governor's dead daughter, hiding here under a false name, with a convenient case of amnesia? The gulat on Z's face was answer enough. Sino ka ba talaga, Z? Neve demanded, his voice rising. What other lies have you been telling me? Before Z could answer, before she could even peer aside to explain, T did something she never expected. He strode towards her small guest room, the one she had been using again since that night. He went straight to her bedside table, opened the drawer, and pulled out her hidden IC card. The one with her real name, Zenaida Cortez, and her smiling, pre-ambush photo. Z gasped. Paano niya nalaman? T stared at the Z, then at C, his face a mask of cold fury and betrayal. So, it's true, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Lahat pala kasinungalingan. Just then, April, who had been awakened by the raised voices, ran into the room. She saw the E in her father's hand, she saw the tears in Z's eyes, she saw the anger on her father's face. And she heard everything. Lola's daughter. April whispered, her eyes wide with confusion and dawning horror. Pero sabi mo, Yaya Z, wala kang pamilya. Sabi mo, hindi mo kami iwanan. She looked from Z to T, her small face crumpling. Lahat kayo sinungaling." And with that, April turned and ran out of the room, out of the house, sobbing hysterically. "April!" Steve shouted, panic lacing his voice. He made to run after her, but Z grabbed his arm. "Tia, wait. Ako na. Ako na ang kakausap sa kanya." Z cried. This was her fault. She had to fix this. But as Z turned to follow April, a new figure appeared at the doorway. It was Steve's older sister, Clara, a sharp-tongued lawyer from Manila whom Z had only met once. Clara had apparently arrived earlier, unannounced, and had overheard everything. Clara's eyes, cold and appraising, swept over Z, lingering on her slightly rounded belly, which Z hadn't been able to completely hide. "So," Clara said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "the missing governor's daughter is not only alive and well, but also pregnant. With her brother's child. How convenient." Then, before Z could react, before Nick could even process what was happening, Clara did something that shocked them all. She strode forward and slapped Z hard across the face. "How dare you?" Clara hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. "How dare you deceive Diva brother, use his kindness, and then peer aside to trap him with child? You shameless, manipulative gold digger." The galit in Clara's voice, the sting of the slap, the weight of her exposed lies, April's heartbroken cries echoing in the distance, and Steve just standing there, looking at her with an expression of utter betrayal. It was all too much. Z's world shattered. Her secrets were out. Her carefully constructed lies had crumbled. And she was left standing there, exposed, vulnerable, and utterly, completely, alone. Buntis ang yaya. At ang yaya ay anak pala ng gobernador. Pero sino nga ba talaga siya ngayon? The sting of Clara's slap, the venom in her words, Keith's cold, accusing stare, and April's heartbroken cries, lahat yon, parang paulit-ulit na tumatatak sa isip at puso ni Zenaida. She felt so ashamed, so devastated. All her lies, her deceptions, had come crashing down, leaving a trail of wreckage in their wake. "Lara, tama na." Nick finally found his voice, stepping between his sister and Zenaida. But his eyes, when they met Zenaida's, were still filled with deep, chilling anger and his profound sense of betrayal. "Umalis ka na, Z.O. Zenaida, kung sino ka man talaga," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth she had once cherished. "Just go. Before you cause any more damage." Each word was like a fresh stab to Zenaida's heart. Before you cause any more damage. So, yun na lang ang tingin niya sa kanya ngayon? Isang perwisyo. Isang gulo. With tears streaming down her face, Zenaida nodded. Wala na siyang mukhang maihaharap. She quickly gathered her few belongings, her hands trembling. Before leaving, she scribbled a hasty note on a piece of paper and left it on Pete's desk. It wasn't an apology, words seemed inadequate for the pain she had caused. It was just a goodbye. A goodbye to the man she had fallen in love with, to the little girl who had started to feel like her own, and to the fragile hope of a future she now knew was impossible. She left the clinic, the Garner home, her heart gaping wound. Hindi niya alam kung saan siya pupunta. She couldn't go back to her father, not yet, not like this. San Rafael felt alien and hostile now. Nie, conflicted and furious, watched her go. Isang parte niya, gustong pigilan siya, gustong pakinggan ang paliwanag niya. But the betrayal, the lies, the thought that she might have been using him all along, it was too much. He found her letter, crumpled it in his fist, and was about to throw it away. But then, something slipped out from between the folds. It was a small, grainy ultrasound photo. Their baby. His hand froze. He stared at the photo, his anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by a wave of something else. Confusion. Longing. And a terrifying sense of loss. He wanted to burn the letter, to erase Zenaida from his life. But the ultrasound photo he couldn't. He carefully tucked it into his wallet, a secret, painful reminder of what he had lost and what he had let go. The days that followed were living hell for everyone. April, devastated by Zinaida's departure and the revelation of her lies, became withdrawn and depressed. She refused to talk to T, blaming him for driving Zinaida away. "It's your fault, Papa," she'd say. "You made Yaya Z leave. I hate you." She would spend hours by her mother's grave in the small cemetery behind the clinic, praying, "Mama, bakit lahat ng mahal ko umaalis? Bakit niyo ako iniiwan?" T, haunted by Zinaida's memory and the image of that teeny ultrasound photo, threw himself into his work, trying to numb the pain. But everywhere he looked, he saw her smile, her laughter, the way her eyes would light up when she played with April. He missed her. God, how he missed her. Pero yung galit, yung pride, they were still too strong. He had let her go. And now, he had to live with the consequences. Then, the public scandal erupted. The media, somehow getting wind of Zinaida's reappearance and her connection to the Garner family, Clara's doing, perhaps, had field day. Governor's dead daughter found alive in remote province. Living under false identity with widowed doctor. Headlines screamed. Photos of Zinaida, of T, of April, were plastered everywhere. Their private lives, their pain, became public fodder. T watched the news reports, a bitter taste in his mouth. He saw Zinaida's face, looking pale and hounded GIF reporters. He heard the anchor's speculative, judgmental tone. "She lied, but let her go," T whispered to himself, a fresh wave of panghihinayang washing over him. He had been so angry, so hurt by her deception, that he hadn't even considered her side. What had driven her to such desperate measures? What dangers was she running from? A few days later, Clara, Tig's sister, arrived at the clinic again. But this time, her usual sharp, judgmental demeanor was gone. She looked contrite. Guilty, even. "Tilly," Clara began, her voice unusually soft. I need to talk to you. About Zinaida." Nia stiffened. "What about her, Clara? Haven't you caused enough trouble?" I know, Clara said, wringing her hands. "I was wrong, Tia. I was angry, I was protective of you, and I overreacted." Pero si April. "What about April?" Neely asked, his heart clenching. "She's not eating, Tia," Clara said, her eyes filled with worry. "She barely talks. All she does is sigh and ask for Zinaida. She even drew this." Clara handed a crumpled piece of paper. It was a drawing of April, a crude but heartbreaking depiction of April, T, and its pregnant Zinaida, all holding hands, with a big, sad rain cloud hovering above them. Below it, April had written in shaky letters, "Mommy Z, please come back. I miss our baby." T stared at the drawing, his vision blurring with unshed tears. "Our baby." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Tilly," Clara said, her voice pleading. "I know she lied to you. I know she hurt you. Pero mahal mo siya, di ba? At mahal ka rin niya. And April needs her, Nia. More than she needs our pride or our anger." She took a deep breath. "I found out where Zinaida is staying. Her father's people, they've put her under house arrest in one of their condos in Manila. For her protection, though. But I think she needs you, Tia. And maybe you need her too." Clara, the cynical lawyer, the protective older sister, was actually begging him to go after Zinaida. Begging him to forgive, to understand. Begging him to come back for April. And for Zinaida. And for their unborn child. The lungkot and panghihinayang in Mika's heart were immense. He had let his anger, his pride, blind him. He had pushed away the woman he loved, the woman who was carrying his child, the woman his daughter had come to see as a mother. He looked at April's drawing again. "Mommy Z, please come back. I miss our baby." He had to fix this. He had to get her back before it was too late. Zenaida felt like a prisoner in her own gilded cage. After Clara's unexpected visit and plea, she had allowed herself a sliver of hope. Pero yung key house arrest sa kondo ng pamilya niya sa Maynila, it felt more suffocating than any remote clinic. Her father, Governor Antonio Cortez, was a man used to getting his way. And his way, right now, was to control Zenaida, to erase the scandal of San Rafael, and to ensure his legacy remained untarnished. "Zenaida, anak," Governor Cortez had said, his voice deceptively calm but with an undercurrent of steel, "this situation with that doctor, it needs to end. You are a Cortez. You have a name to protect, a future to consider. Yung bata, well, there are ways to handle that discreetly." The implication was clear. He wanted her to forget Tio. He wanted her to abort the child. "Hindi, Papa." Zenaida had cried, her hand instinctively going to her still flat belly. "Anak ko to. At mahal ko si Tie." The words, spoken aloud for the first time, felt both terrifying and liberating. "Pag-ibig?" Governor Cortez had scoffed. "Hija, you are knave. That man, that nobody from the province, he was using you. He saw an opportunity. You are ruining your legacy, Zenaida, for a nobody." His voice rose, the anger finally breaking through his composed facade. But Zenaida, for the first time in her life, stood her ground. The fear was still there, yes. But something else had taken root within her, a fierce, protective love for her unborn child, and a stubborn, unwavering affection for Dave. "Hindi niya naintindihan, Papa," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Tie is not the nobody. He's everything to me. At itong bata, itong anak namin, hindi ko siya ipagpapalit kahit kanino, kahit sa pangalan pa ng mga Cortez." Their arguments were frequent, exhausting. Zenaida felt trapped, isolated. She missed San Rafael. She missed April. And she missed T with an ache so profound, it felt like a physical wound. Then, one rainy afternoon, there was an unexpected visitor at the condo. It was T. He looked different. Tired, yes, but also determined. He wasn't wearing his usual doctor's coat or his casual provincial clothes. He was in a simple but neat polo shirt and slacks, looking like he had traveled a long way. The guards, under Governor Cortez' strict orders, initially refused to let him in. But T, with a quiet dignity and an unwavering resolve, stood his ground. "I'm here to see Zenaida Cortez," he stated, his voice calm but firm. "And I'm not leaving until I do." Zenaida, who had heard the commotion from her room, rushed to the lobby, her heart pounding. "T.A." Their eyes met, and in that instant, all the pain, all the anger, all the misunderstandings, seemed to melt away. All that was left was longing. "Let him in," Zenaida told the guards, her voice surprisingly strong. In the sterile, impersonal living room of the condo, with Governor Cortez glaring at them from his armchair, Tiek finally had his chance to speak. "Governor Cortez," Tiek began, his voice respectful but unwavering. "I know what you think of me. And maybe, some of it is true. I'm not rich. I don't come from a powerful family. I'm just a simple doctor from a small town." He paused, then looked at Zenaida, his eyes filled with an emotion so raw, so tender, it made her breath catch. "But I love your daughter, sir. I love Zenaida. More than anything." "Love?" Governor Cortez sneered. "What do you know about love, boy? All C is an opportunist, trying to leech off SV family's name." "I don't want your money, sir," T said, his voice firm. "I don't want your name. I just want her back. I want Zenaida. And I want our child." He pulled out the crumpled ultrasound photo from his wallet and placed it on the coffee table. This is INF child too, sir. And I will fight for them. With or without your approval. Zenaida stared at T, tears streaming down her face. He was fighting for her. For them. For their baby. The katatagan in his voice, the love in his eyes, it was everything she had ever hoped for. Governor Cortez was momentarily stunned into silence ear tiget audacity. But before he could retort, Zenaida's phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara, Tigic's sister. It contained a single attachment, a scanned copy of child's drawing. It was from April. A drawing of a stick figure Zenaida, with a big, smiling belly, holding hands with a stick figure April and a stick figure Tig. Above them, a bright, shining sun. And below, in April's shaky handwriting, Dear Mommy Z, please come home. I miss you. I miss our baby. Kahit hindi mo ako totoong anak, ikaw pa rin ang mommy ko. Love, April. Zenaida clutched the phone to her chest, her heart breaking and soaring at the same time. Mommy Z. April still considered her a mother. April still wanted her. April missed their baby. That was it, that was the final push Zenaida needed. She looked at her father, her eyes blazing with new, fierce determination. Papa, she said, her voice clear and strong, mahal ko si Tig. At mahal ko ang magiging anak namin. At hindi ko na sila iiwanan. Not for you. Not for anyone. She stood up, walked over to Ki, and took his hand. Let's go home, T, she said, her voice filled with newfound pag-asa. Let's go home to April. But Zenaida knew it wasn't enough. She couldn't just run away again. She had to face her past, her identity, on her own terms. The next day, Zenaida Cortez, with TV and a surprisingly supportive Clara Gi at her side, called her own press conference. No more hiding. No more lies. Panahon na ng pagtatapat. She stood before the blinding lights of the cameras, the barrage of questions from reporters, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. Ako si Zenaida Cortez, she began, her voice clear and strong. Anak ni Governor Antonio Cortez. At nagtago ako. Nagpanggap ako. Dahil natakot ako. Pero tapos na iyon. She told them everything. The ambush, her escape, her life in San Rafael, her relationship with T, her pregnancy. She didn't spare any details. She owned her story, her mistakes, her truth. Hindi ako perpekto, she concluded, her gaze unwavering. Pero tao lang ako. Nagmamahal. Nasasaktan. At handang lumaban para sa mga mahal ko sa buhay. The press conference sent shockwaves throughout the country. Some condemned her. Some praised her bravery. But Zenaida didn't care. All that mattered was that she had finally reclaimed her voice, her identity. Ako si Zenaida. And she was no longer afraid. T watched her, his heart swelling with pride and love. This was the woman he had fallen in love with. Strong. Resilient. And fiercely, unapologetically herself. The healing had begun. The pag-asa was real. And their journey towards a future together, though still filled with challenges, was finally, truly, underway. Zenaida's press conference was a bombshell. Public opinion, initially swayed by the sensationalized media reports, slowly began to shift. Marami ang humanga sa katapangan niya, sa kanyang pag-amin, at sa kanyang paninindigan para sa kanyang pag-ibig at sa kanyang magiging anak. Governor Cortez, facing immense public pressure and perhaps a belated pang of conscience, eventually backed down, offering a grudging, public apology to Zenaida and C. He didn't fully approve, but he stopped actively trying to sabotage them. It was a small victory, but a significant one. Zenaida, finally free from her father's suffocating control, reclaimed her name, Zenaida Cortez Garner, on her own terms. She chose to step away from the political limelight, focusing instead on her impending motherhood and on building a quiet, simple life with TV and April in San Rafael. A few weeks after the press conference, Steve brought Zenaida back to where it all began, the small, unassuming clinic in San Rafael. April, who had been eagerly awaiting the return, ran out to meet them, her face alight with pure, unadulterated joy. "Mommy Z! Papa Kize!" April shrieked, throwing herself into their arms. "You came back! You really came back!" Zenaida hugged April tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Anak, nandito na kami. At hinding-hindi ka na namin iiwanan." The kilig and kaligayahan in that moment were so profound, so overwhelming, it felt like her heart would burst. That afternoon, under the shade of the old acacia tree in the clinic garden, the same tree where they had shared that stolen dance under the stars, Kiki knelt before Zenaida. He wasn't wearing a fancy suit, just his usual simple doctor's attire. He wasn't holding a diamond ring, but a small, intricately woven ring made of dried sampaguita flowers, to nod to their shared memories. "Zenaida Cortez," Steve began, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes shining with a love that was both fierce and tender. "I know our story started with lies, with fear, with secrets. Pero sa likod ng lahat ng iyon, Zenaida, natagpuan ko ang tunay na pagmamahal. Natagpuan kita." He took her hand. "Hindi ako mayaman, Zenaida. Hindi ako galing sa makapangyarihang pamilya. Isa lang akong simpleng doktor sa isang maliit na bayan. Pero kaya kong ibigay sa'yo ang buong puso ko, ang buong buhay ko. I'm not asking you to marry me because you're a governor's daughter, or because you're carrying the child. I'm asking you to marry me because you're Zenaida. The woman I love. The woman I can't imagine my life without." He then pulled out, not just the sampaguita ring, but a set of official-looking documents. "These," he said, his voice a little shaky, "are adoption papers. For April. I want us to be a real family, Zenaida. In every sense of the word. If you'll have us." Zenaida was speechless, tears of joy streaming down her face. This man, this incredible, selfless man, he was offering her everything she had ever dreamed of. A home. A family. A love that was true, unconditional, and unafraid. "Iti," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. And yes, I'll be April's mother." He slipped the sampaguita ring onto her finger. It was simple, fragrant, and more precious to Zenaida than any diamond. April, who had been watching with wide, tear-filled eyes, rushed forward and hugged them both. Finally, she exclaimed, "Our real family." Their wedding was held a few weeks later, right there in the small, humble clinic where they first met. It wasn't a grand affair. Just their closest friends, Lorena, who was now Zenaida's staunchest ally, Clara, who had become a surprisingly supportive sister-in-law, and the joyful, noisy presence of April, who served as their flower girl, ring bearer, and chief giggler. Zenaida wore a simple white dress, her baby bump now showing proudly. T wore his best barong. They exchanged their vows, not with flowery, rehearsed speeches, but with simple, heartfelt promises whispered from the heart. "Salamat sa'yo, Dulcie," Zenaida whispered to Kizzy as they stood on the same bench under the acacia tree, watching the stars appear, just like they did on that one fateful night. "Salamat sa pagligtas mo sa akin noon at ngayon." Neve pulled her close, kissing her tenderly. "Ikaw ang nagligtas sa akin, Z," he whispered back. "Ikaw ang nagturo sa akin kung paano magmahal ulit, kung paano magtiwala ulit, kung paano mabuhay ulit." Their life as a family in San Rafael was quiet, simple, but filled with an abundance of love and laughter. Zenaida gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom they named Antonio Miguel, Anton for her father, peace offering, symbol of healing, and Miguel in honor of the archangel, their protector. April was an ecstatic older sister, doting on her baby brother. Neve continued to serve the community as their beloved doctor. "Zenaida, using her political science background and her newfound voice, started a small foundation to help underprivileged women and children in San Rafael and nearby provinces. She had found her true calling, not in the corridors of power, but in the quiet, meaningful work of making a difference in people's lives. One evening, as Zenaida was tucking April and baby Anton into bed, April looked up at her eyes shining. "Mommy Z," she said, "alam mo ba, si Mama Angel, her biological mother, I think she's happy na rin sa heaven. Kasi masaya na tayo. Kasi buo na tayo." Zenaida's heart swelled. She kissed April's forehead. "Anak, sigurado akong masaya na siya. Sa likod ng lahat ng lihim, sa likod ng lahat ng sakit, sa likod ng lahat ng takot na tagpuan nila ang kanilang tahanan. Isang tahanan na binuo hindi ng dugo o ng apelyido, kundi ng pagmamahal, pagpapatawad at pangalawang pagkakataon." And as Zenaida looked at her sleeping children, with Tivik's strong, comforting arm around her, she knew, with a certainty that filled her soul, that this was where she was always meant to be. Hindi na siya anak ng gobernador na nagtatago. Hindi na siya si TZ, ang yaya na mailihim. Siya na si Zenaida Cortez Garner. Isang ina. Isang asawa. Isang babaeng natagpuan ang kanyang tunay na pagkatao, at ang kanyang tunay na pag-ibig, sa pinaka-hindi inaasahang pagkakataon. The storm had passed. And in its wake, a beautiful, resilient rainbow had emerged. A rainbow named family. A rainbow named love. Optional twist teaser, if desired, as the camera pans away from their peaceful home, it briefly lingers on a framed photo of Tigat's late wife, Angel. For a split second, her eyes in the photo seem to hold, knowing, almost enigmatic smile, before the scene fades to black. "Sige, narito ang isang mensahe mula sa akin, ang inyong abang lingkod na kumata ng kwento ni Zenaida Z, Gie at April. Isang sige, naragsilip mula sa likod ng mga lihim. Mensahe ng may akda ito ang isang mensahe mula sa inyong abang lingkod na sumulat ng kwento ni Zenaida Z, Gie at April. Isang mainit na yak. Mga ka-plot twist at kakilig. Unang-una, gusto kong ipaabot ang aking pinakamalalim na pasasalamat sa inyong walang sawang pagsubaybay sa bawat kap mula sa San Rafael at mula sa puso ng author. Mga kapwa ko mahilig sa drama at kilig. Unang-una, gusto kong iparating ang aking nag-uumabanata ng buhay ni Zenaida, OZ, depende sa mood niya, char, daw siki, at angapaw na pasasalamat sa inyong walang sawang pagsubaybay sa bawat kabanata ng kwento, napaka-cute na si April. Mula sa madugong pagtakas, sa pagpapanggap na esi ni Zenaida, OZ, depende sa mood niya. Char, ang ating stoic pero deep down malaya, hanggang sa mga pasabog na revelasyon at, syempre, sa happy ending na pinaghirambing na si Dauphihi, at ang napaka-cute na si April. Mula sa madugong paggapan nilang lahat, grabe, sinamahan niyo sila, at ako, sa bawat takot, intratakas, sa mga house rules ni Dosi, sa halik ng lihim, hanggang sa pasabog na presiga, at nakakakilig na sandali. Salamat ng bonggang-bongga. Habang binubuo ko ang kwentong ito, para akong laging nasa isang medical drama na maihalong political con, sinamahan niyo sila sa kanilang napaka-intense na paglalakbay. Maraming self-thriller at, syempre, isang malupit na romance. May mga eksenang kinakabahan ako para kay Zenaida amat po sa inyong oras at pagmamahal. Habang isinusulat ko ang istoryang ito, may mga pagkakataong gusto kong i-shake si Tire para matauhan at may mga moments na napapa. Para akong laging nasa isang medical drama na maihalong political thriller at isang napakatamis na family story. May obu, ang sweet naman ni April, ako. Ang sarap sa pakiramdam na lumikha ng mga pagkakataon na kinakabahan ako para kay si. Naiinis kay Governor Cortez, sorry po, Papa Gov karakter na may kanya-kanyang bigat na dinadala, mga sikretong pilit itinatago, pero sa huli, nanaig pa rin ang pag-asa at pagmamahal. Sa likod ng lahat ng tak, at syempre, sobrang kinikilig sa mga silent but deadly na galawan ni Dauphihi. Ang tampuhan, selos at kilig, may ilang mahahalagang aral na sana sarap sa pakiramdam na mabigyang buhay ang mga karakter na may sariling bigat na ibaunin ninyo. Ang ating nakaraan, hindi dapat maging hadlang sa dinadala, may mga lihim, pero sa huli, nahanap pa rin ang daan patungo sa ating kinabukasan. Lahat tayo ay may mga lihim, mga pagkakamali, mga pinagsisiswanag at pagmamahal. Sa likod ng mga takot, intriga, kilig, atihan. Pero hindi ibig sabihin noon, wala na tayong karapatang sumaya o magmahal muli. Si pagpapatawad, may ilang mahahalagang aral akong gustong ibahagi sa inyo. Ginaida chose to bury her past, but eventually, she had to confront it to truly move forward. 2. Kakwentuhan. Minsan, kailangan nating ilibing ang ating minsan, ang mga taong hindi natin inaasahan ang siyang magiging sandalan natin. Si lumang pagkatao para matagpuan ang ating tunay na sarili. Ang pagtakas ni Zenaida ay tili, na mukhang suplado at mailap, siya pa pala ang magiging the safe haven ni Zenaida. Naging daan para makilala niya si Easy, ang babaeng mas matapang, mas mapagmahal, at mas totoo. Ang tunay na pamilya ay hindi lang Nak at si Zenaida, na isang stranger, siya pala ang magbibigay ng bagong pag-asa sa pamilya ni Tig. Don't judge a book kick its cover, ika nga. Ang pabase sa dugo, kundi sa pagmamahal, pag-aalaga, at pagtanggap. April found a mother in Z, and Z found his daughter in April, proving that love knows no labels. Lamilya ay hindi lang tungkol sa dugo, kundi sa pagmamahal, pag-aalaga, at pagtanggap. April found a mother in Z, and Z found a family in Miggy and April, proving that love can create. Lahat tayo ay may mga lihim at mga pagkakamali sa nakaraan, pero hindi ito dapat maging hadlang para sa bond stronger than any biological tie. Ang katotohanan, kahit gaano pa kasakit ang ating hinaharap. Ang mahalaga ay kung paano natin ito haharapin, kung paano tayo matsyang magpapalaya sa atin. It took immense courage for Zenaida to reveal her true identity, but itututo, at kung paano tayo hihingi ng tawad. Sa likod ng bihi was only then that she could truly begin to heal and build an authentic life. Laging mayawat cold na personality, minsan ay may pusong nasaktan lang at naghihintay ng tamang pangalawang pagkakataon. Sa pag-ibig, sa pamilya, sa buhay. Kahit gaong magpapalambot dito, daw si Tie, ikaw ba yan? Ang katapangan ay hindi lang sa pakikipaglaban, kundi pati na rin sa pag-amin gaano pa tayo nasaktan o nakasakit, laging may espasyo para sa pagpapatawad at para sa panibagong simula. Sana po, sa kwentong ito, naramdaman nyo katotohanan at sa pagpili sa kung ano ang tama, kahit pa mahirap. Zenaida's press conference was a testament to this. Sana po, sa kwentong ito, naramdaman nyo yung init ng pagmamahal, yung tapang ng pagharap sa katotohanan, at yung ginhawa ng pagpapatawad. Kung may mga aral o emosyon kayong napulot, ang init ng pamilya, ang kilig ng isang pag-ibig na hindi sumusuko, at ang wag po kayong mag-atubiling ibahagi ang kwentong ito sa inyong mga mahal sa buhay. Pag-asa na laging mailiwanag sa kabila ng dilim. Kung may mga eksena o linya na tumatak sa inyong puso, wag po kayong mag-atubiling i-share ang may kakilala kayong nangangailangan din ng konting pag-asa o ng paalala na may tahanan pa ring naghihintay para sa kanila. At syempre, I would be absolutely thrilled to redentong ito sa inyong mga mahal sa buhay. Malay nyo, may kakilala kayong nangangailangan din ng konting inspirasyon o ng paalala na laging may tahanan na naghihintay para your comments and reactions. Ano ng eksena ang pinaka nagpakaba o nagpakilig sa inyo? May sa kanila. At syempre, super excited akong mabasa ang inyong mga komento. Ano ng chapter paborito ba kayong linya na gusto nyong i-quote? Team Zenaida o Team Z ba ang pinaka nagustuhan nyo? Favorite character moment? May banat ba si Dolphy nakin kayo? At yung optional twist sa dulo, anong sa inyo? Spill nyo na yan, mga bes. Your thoughts make this writer's heart do happy dance. Muli, maraming salamat sa inyong paglalakbay kasama sina Zenaida, Ni at April. Hanggang sa susilig kayo ng todo. O baka naman may hugoti si Zina na pa, relate matsunod na kwentong puno ng lihim, pag-ibig at pag-asa. Tandaan kayo. Spill all the tea, mga bes. Your thoughts are the fuel. Muli, maraming sa likod ng bawat lihim, laging may pusong naghahanap ng tahanan. Nagmamahal at laging naghahanap ng plot twist. Ang inyong manunulat. Thumb up. Thumb down.